Hello again, rail fans, and welcome back to another video. We begin this journey on April 2nd, 2022, and we are located at the Park Road Railroad Crossing in Worthington, Ohio. YouTube friend Trilight Productions was able to tag along with me, and we were here today to catch Norfolk Southern 179, a daily Bellevue, Ohio to Irondale, Alabama mixed freight train, which had Norfolk Southern 1074, the Lackawanna Heritage Unit, in its locomotive consist. In addition to Norfolk Southern 1074, a BNSF Heritage 1-9 was also in the locomotive consist as well. Considering Norfolk Southern 1074 was one of the two Heritage units that I haven't seen yet, and considering a BNSF Heritage 1-9 was tagging along, it was a shameless plug that we had to try and come out and get this. Unfortunately, we missed a Norfolk Southern intermodal train heading southbound down the Sandusky District as we pulled up to the crossing. However, coming up behind the intermodal train was a southbound mixed freight train, which I have reason to believe is 14Q, a daily Decatur, Illinois to Portsmouth, Ohio mixed freight train. As per usual, 14Q was a big train today because coming up here was its mid-train DPU, which revealed to be a complete surprise. BNSF SD70 Mac number 9962 was assisting the AC44C6M on 14Q today. This was only the second time I've seen a BNSF SD70 Mac down here in the state of Ohio, as they're pretty hard to catch, and older models of the SD70s are hard to catch in general. Real quickly, another reason why we came out on this day was because I borrowed a Nikon DSLR camera from my graphics class at school to try out. Basically, I was here to take pictures while my mom recorded the videos on my cell phone, and as you're seeing, it's turning out really good. Shortly after 14Q made his way south, 179 also makes his way south shortly behind 14Q. And suffice to say, 179 had a really colorful lash up on him today with the two special units on it. After seeing the Norfolk Southern trains at Park Road, we then moved several days later onto April 5th, 2022, and we are located at NS's former Buckeye Yard. As you probably are able to tell, you know exactly the reason why we were here. Norfolk Southern Train 904 was sitting here under the Fisher Road overpass, which just so happened to be one of Norfolk Southern's geometry train, specifically NS-34, the brick. Assigned to take NS-34 today was Norfolk Southern C44-9W number 9754, which was built in 2003 by General Electric, and is wearing the short-lived white face scheme, and is one of the few locomotives operating today that has that scheme. NS-34 is the slug unit to the geometry train, which was originally built by the Electromotive Division in 1965 for the Norfolk and Western Railroad as an SD-35 and was numbered 1530. 1530 was later rebuilt into a road slug in 1977 and was classified in RP-E6 and was renumbered to 9921, and then it was renumbered again to 9951. Norfolk Southern later got the slug in 1982 after the company was formed following a merger between the Southern Railway and the Norfolk and Western Railroad, and used it up until 1993 when it was retired from service. It was then rebuilt into the slug that it is today in 1998. If you look at pictures of NS-34 between 1999 and 2007, you'll notice that it didn't have a cab. Norfolk Southern later added a cab to the locomotive in 2008. NS-34 is weighted in a way that's similar to a loaded car or locomotive, and is outfitted with all sorts of technology to help crews aboard the geometry train detect the slightest defects in the rails that the normal track inspector wouldn't be able to see. Behind NS-34 is a passenger car, specifically NS-33, which was built in 1950 by the Pullman Standard Company for the Union Pacific as a standard coach car for passenger service. Between 1971 and 1994, this car was also used by the Alaska Railroad and the St. Louis Car Company, before Norfolk Southern bought it in 1994. It was then rebuilt and put into service along with NS-34 in 1999, and they are semi-permanently coupled together so they can work together while a locomotive is pulling them. Now, the reason why Norfolk Southern's track geometry trains are called the brick is because of the Tuscan red paint scheme that the equipment wears, similar to the equipment that is used on the Norfolk Southern Office Car Special. Anyways, I thought this was a pretty good catch, considering this was the first time I've seen one of NS's track geometry trains, and also because of the fact that I never thought I would see another Norfolk Southern train in Buckeye Yard again. Until today. After catching the brick in Buckeye Yard, we then moved several days later onto April 7th, 2022, and we are located outside the Central Ohio Model Railroad Club in Worthington, Ohio. On this day, we were here for the weekly operating session. Around the midpoint of the operating session, I decided to take a break and go outside to see if there were any trains coming. While I was out here, I heard this. You got that right, there's a train coming. When I heard that horn, I was anticipating it to be a Norfolk Southern train. However, when I saw its headlights poke through the trees, I realized it was actually a CSX train, specifically a southbound empty coal train traveling down the Columbus Line subdivision, aka the Burt Line. Sometime after dark and after the operating session was over, we then saw another train, which was Norfolk Southern southbound mixed freight train 171, a daily Conway, Pennsylvania to Chattanooga, Tennessee mixed freight train. I climbed up a vegetation-infested hill next to the tracks just to get this shot. After seeing those two trains at the Central Ohio Model Railroad Club, we then moved several days later onto April 10th, 2022, and we are located at the Schrock Road Railroad Crossing in Worthington, Ohio. We were here today because I was getting reports of NS Mixed Freight Train 171 having a pair of New York Susquehanna and Western SD60s in its locomotive consist. The unfortunate thing is that we weren't able to see this particular train. However, the hour that we spent here did not disappoint. As soon as we got here, I noticed some headlights of a southbound train coming on the Norfolk Southern Sandusky District, which belonged to Intermodal Train 218, on a mad dash between Chicago, Illinois, and Charlotte, North Carolina. Shortly after 218 passed, I noticed something up the tracks from me on the Sandusky District, and about a few minutes later, it turned into a triangle of lights, which meant that another southbound train was coming down the Sandusky District. I did not get the symbol for this train, but I have reason to believe it's 14Q, our daily Decatur, Illinois to Portsmouth, Ohio mixed freight train, utilizing Union Pacific foreign power. As it's per typical for 14Q, it was a big freight train today, and was utilizing a mid-train DPU, which was also Union Pacific. Now I was standing next to the trees that were 50 feet in front of me because I was anticipating the mid-train DPU would be facing backwards. When I realized the mid-train DPU was facing forwards, I had to run back to where we parked the car to get this picture and the clip that I just showed you in hopes of not getting the low-hanging branches in my picture, and it worked. I nearly had a heart attack when this unidentified northbound mixed freight train made its way around the blank corner on the Sandusky District with no warning. I rushed to get my phone out just to get this shot, and I'm glad that I did because of the SD70 Mac that was trailing second behind the Norfolk Southern SD70 Ace, specifically BNSF 9962 that we saw earlier in the video. After seeing the 3 NS trains at Schrock Road, we then moved several days later onto April 13th, 2022, and we are located at the Leap Road Railroad Crossing in Hilliard, Ohio, along CSX's Scottslawn Secondary. On this day, we were here to catch the daily CSX I-147, an intermodal train that operates between Buckeye Yard in Hilliard, Ohio, to the Giant Yard in North Baltimore, and on this day, he had an all-rebuilt consist assigned to take him. Specifically an EMD SD70 Mace rebuild and a GE CM44AH rebuild, although the CM44AH on the train today was wearing CSX's new paint scheme. Considering how difficult it has been for me to see a CSX locomotive with the new paint scheme, I figured that this was the opportunity to do so. Through a very dark shot because there was a big dark cloud above me, CSX I-147 emerged from the yard lead and onto the Scottslawn Secondary for the trip ahead of him to North Baltimore. For those that may be new, I'm going to take a few minutes to explain exactly what we have here. For many years, CSX Transportation has been painting their locomotives in a paint scheme known as YN3B. Introduced in 2011, as the name suggests, YN3B is a slight modification to CSX's YN3 paint scheme, which utilizes dark blue and yellow colors, and a small CSX logo on the sides, front, and rear, encased in brackets, assimilating a boxcar. Between 2011 and 2021, CSX has been utilizing the YN3B paint scheme for many years on all of their new and rebuilt locomotives in this time period, which included CSX 4550. In August of 2021, CSX made the announcement of their minor rebranding campaign. This mainly included the company reverting back to their much older YN3 paint scheme, which was introduced in 2002, but with a much more modern and bolder appearance. This new paint scheme, known as YN3C, or the website scheme by railfans, is now the standard paint scheme for all CSX locomotives that are getting repainted or rebuilt from this point on into the future, which includes CSX 7021 shown here. Anyways, I thought this train was a pretty good catch considering the two rebuilt locomotives are taking a train together, and I finally got to see a CSX locomotive with their new image. After seeing the new CSX locomotive, we then moved to the very next day on April 14th, 2022, and we are located at the Central Ohio Model Railroad Club in Worthington, Ohio. On this day, we were here to do the weekly operating session, or that was the original plan because it quickly changed as soon as we arrived. The Norfolk Southern Sandusky District, as of the time we were there on this day, had at least 4 or 5 trains to send through while we were at the club doing the operating session, so many of the club members changed their minds and wanted to see the parade come through. The parade soon began about 20 minutes after we arrived when a Norfolk Southern southbound mixed freight train made its way down the Sandusky District. Unfortunately, I didn't get the symbols of most of the trains that we saw today. After the mixed freight train made its way through, I decided to stick around a while longer to see if another one would show up. And sure enough, one did, which was southbound intermodal train 234, a daily Chicago, Illinois to Norfolk, Virginia train. Okay, that's a weird sounding horn. After running my model trains for the operating session for a good solid 20 minutes, I went back outside to see if there were any more trains coming, and as it turned out, there was another one on its way, which was another Norfolk Southern southbound, which happened to be a loaded grain train. As you just saw, a brand new Norfolk Southern SD70 Ace was assigned to lead this grain train, specifically NS 1228. This locomotive had an interesting backstory because it was originally built in 2019 as EMDX 2118. It was built for Norfolk Southern standards, but for the lease fleet of Progress Rail, which was the successor of EMD. When this locomotive and 9 others were completed, they were intended to be used in lease service, but unfortunately never turned a revenue wheel, and just sat around Progress Rail's Muncie, Indiana shops. That was the case until 2022, when Norfolk Southern signed an agreement to trade in 20 of their SD70 ACU rebuilds to pay for these 10 SD70 Aces, and they were delivered in March of 2022. Even though 1228 was about a month old, it still looked like it rolled out of the Muncie, Indiana shops yesterday, which I thought was a pretty good catch. Now, the shot that I got of this next train I'm not particularly a big fan of. Here we see another Norfolk Southern mixed freight train, this time heading northbound up the Sandusky District. As I was about to find out, there was some foreign power in the locomotive consist of this train, which came in the form of a Union Pacific SD70M. I wanted to get a nice pan shot of the UPSD70M, but considering how close I was standing to the tracks, and how well the tracks are covered by vegetation, it didn't turn out as well as I was hoping for.
German engine. Sorry, I couldn't.
You didn't see the.
Oh yeah, I see the headlights. Here it comes.
I got a camera. Oh yeah.
Standing on what was once Photo Hill, we then see our last train, which is Norfolk Southern southbound intermodal train 21N, a daily Detroit, Michigan to Columbus, Ohio train. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to stay for the whole train because I had to leave. After watching the NS trains pass the Central Ohio Model Railroad Club, we then returned to the same location a week later on April 21st, 2022. Like all the other times we've been to this location, the goal was the same, to participate in the weekly operating session. When the operating session was over, I walked up to the tracks to see if there were any trains coming before we left, and sure enough, I saw the headlights of an unidentified southbound CSX-loaded coal train coming down the Columbus Line subdivision, aka the Burt Line. On this day, he had a solo ET-44AH in the lead, and an ES-44AH acting as an end-train DPU. After watching the CSX-loaded coal train pass the club, we then move a couple of days later onto April 23rd, 2022, and we are located at McCord Park in Worthington, Ohio. There were two reasons as to why we were out today. Reason one was because the weather was way too good to pass up, with temperatures reaching the 80-degree mark, making it feel like it's the middle of summer. Reason two was because Norfolk Southern 171, our daily Conway, Pennsylvania to Chattanooga, Tennessee mixed freight train, had Norfolk Southern 8025, the Monongahela Heritage Unit in its locomotive consist. I saw this Heritage Unit way back in 2017, but considering it's been 5 years since I've seen it, I decided I wanted to see it again. It did not take very long for a train to show up shortly after we arrived, which was an unidentified Norfolk Southern northbound mixed freight train going up the Sandusky District. I moved down to the baseball fields next to the tracks for my next shot, which was of Norfolk Southern 171. And as you just saw, 8025 was on the train as advertised. I would also like to point out that I was not wearing ear protection for either of these trains, and a direct result from that came when 171's locomotives passed me. After catching NS 8025 for the second time, we then moved to the very next day on April 24th, 2022, and we are located next to Norfolk Southern's Dayton District at CP 146 in Lincoln Village. On this day, we were here for another Norfolk Southern 171, the daily Conway, Pennsylvania to Chattanooga, Tennessee mixed freight train. Well, you just saw one a second ago. However, this one was different from the one that we saw yesterday. What made today's 171 different from the one that we saw yesterday, instead of having a heritage unit in its locomotive consist, today's 171 had a streamliner, specifically a former Iowa Pacific E9A, which was recently acquired by Cater Parrott RailNet down in Georgia, and 171 was the train that would take the E unit to its new home. Considering that diesel locomotives from the 1950s are just as rare as the steam locomotives that they replaced, I knew that it was a shameless plug that we had to come and try and see this. However, the wait on this train was not for the faint of heart. Between the time that we got to CP 146 and the train got to CP 146 was about 3 hours. It was quite a long wait, but a success was still a success. We still got to see this unique piece of railroad history as it trails behind two Norfolk Southern GEs from the modern day as they make their way towards Chattanooga, Tennessee, and the E unit eventually reaching its new owners. After the locomotives of 171 passed me, we decided to break off here and go home. As the E unit continues its long journey to its new owners, this is where we now conclude yet another video. As you just saw, April was a pretty good month to be railfanning on Norfolk Southern. Leave a like and or a comment down below to share your thoughts on the video. If you enjoy the content that I produce, consider subscribing to my YouTube channel and tapping the bell button to be notified when a new video gets posted. Anyways, that's all for now. This is All Ohio Railfan, signing off.